Good morning. Good morning. Thank you. I am pleased to call to order this monthly meeting of the Public Safety and Justice Committee at 10 a.m. on February 15th, 2023. Camille is our clerk, and would you begin, please, with a roll call?
Of course. Vice Chairperson Chavez
Here.
and Chairperson Ellenberg.
I am here.
Thank you. You have a quorum.
Thank you very much. And let's now do, before we go on to public comment, an introduction of all of the folks on the dais, please, if you don't mind.
Good morning. Dr. Jordan with the Medical Examiner Coroner's Office.
Good morning. Oh, thank you. Good morning, Pratima Pandey from Custody Health Services on behalf of Dr. Eureka Day.
Chief Probation Officer Nick Burchard.
Good morning, Damon Silver from the Public Defender's Office on behalf of Molly O'Neill.
Sheriff Bob Johnson with the Sheriff's Office.
Michaeline Regan, Pretrial Services on behalf of Matthew Fisk.
Good morning, Julie Emity, Assistant Presiding Judge of the Santa Clara County Superior Court, here on behalf of Presiding Judge Beth McGowan. That's right.
And I'm Greta Hansen, the county's Chief Operating Officer.
Kavita Narayan, County Counsel's Office.
Casey Halkin, Deputy County Executive.
Good morning, Sylvia Perez McDonald, Director, Independent Defense Counsel Office.
Good morning, Javier Aguirre, Director of Diversion and Reentry Services.
Thank you. Good morning and welcome to all of you. We have lots of on behalfs of. I don't see anybody from the district attorney or an on behalf of. Oh, now I do. Hi, James. Thank you. You can sit up here at the grown-up table if you like. All right. We'll begin with public comment. Item 2, that portion of the agenda set aside for members of the public wishing to address the committee on items not on today's agenda, but within the purview of our committee. Do we have any public speakers? Camille.
We have one in-person speaker and so far no virtual speakers, Madam Chair.
Okay, let me make the same announcement that I did at our board meeting. The way I'm going to run public comment is to invite first folks who are in the chambers to speak. We'll then turn to people who are joining us by Zoom. The Zoom speaking list will close when the first person begins speaking for purposes of meeting management. So let's begin with the in-person speakers, please.
All right. So our in-person speaker is Paul Soto. Please approach the dais.
Good morning, Paul Soto from the Horseshoe.
Oh, one moment, please. Sorry. 3 minutes to speak, Madam Chair? Okay, there you go. Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul Soto from the Horseshoe. I'll be reading from some papers written by Philip Zimbardo. He had conducted the Stanford experiment at Stanford University's psychology department in 1973. And I quote, "Prisons are places that demean humanity, destroy the nobility of human nature, and bring out the worst in social relations among people. They are as bad for the guards as for the prisoners in terms of their destructive impact on self-esteem, sense of justice, and human compassion. Prisons are failed social political experiments that continue to be places of evil and even to multiply like the bad seeds of a sorcerer's apprentice because the public is indifferent to what takes place in secret. Because politicians use them and fill them up as much as they can to demonstrate only that they are tougher on crime than their political opponents. I was able to terminate my failed prison experiment, but every citizen is paying for, and I will continue to pay an enormous price in taxes, the failed experiments taking place in every state of this union, the failed U.S. prison system. This system has failed by any criteria of recidivism, of prison violence, of illegal activities practiced in prisons, of second offenders, often committing more serious second time around crimes than initially, of low morale of correctional staff, and of deadly prison riots. Among the most outrageous examples of the evil of the prison settings come from the recent reports of guards staging fights among inmates and then shooting the combatants. 50 have been shot and 7 were killed in the past 8 years, 1996. That happened in Corcoran. And so when we're talking about prisons and we're talking about society, we have to accept the fact that in this county was held a polyclass murder trial. And there was an inflammatory response from Richard Allen Davis flipping off the jury. Now, we understand that. That was immoral, that was unethical. He paid the price for that. We had a subscription for that, and he paid that price. But there was this momentum that society itself was going to make everybody else pay for what it is that Richard Allen Davis had done. And that was the injustice that created the deficiencies within the recovery and rehabilitative circles in this county. It created the deficiencies amongst detox beds, residential treatment, and SLE, and possibly any kind of vocational training that a person would have used. Because we were stating that as a society, we are going to send human beings and sentence them to 25 years to life in prison for having a bag of dope, for having broken into a car and stolen a car stereo, or stealing a DVD player from Target. We need to confront this.
And that concludes our speakers.
Thank you. Just one more note to folks that are joining us virtually. If you would like to speak on public comment right now, is the time to put your hand up. Do we have any additional joiners, Camille?
No, we do not.
All right, then let's hear the speaker that has raised their hand.
Okay. Oh, I believe that they have put down their hand if ever they have. So we have no more speakers, Madam Chair.
Okay, then we will move on to item 3, which is approval of the consent calendar and changes to the committee agenda. And Supervisor Chavez, I have a couple of changes that I'd like to move for today's agenda. I'd like to hear item 10, which is announcements, first, so that we can recognize 2 community members in the room who are joining us today to highlight some stunning and really meaningful art that they created at the Reentry Center in Gilroy. On the discussion portion of the agenda, I think it would be prudent to focus our time on the court backlog item, as I expect that item to stimulate a robust discussion. So in service of this, I'd like to move item 4, which is the ATI work group update, and item 7, the EH usage report, to the consent calendar. And Supervisor Chavez, I know that you've had concerns about the increase in commissary rates in relation to the past grievance report, and I very much appreciate your watchful eye here. Would you like to hear the related items, 8 and 9, on the regular agenda, and if so, together, or would you be comfortable moving them to consent?
I would, if we could hear 8 and 9 together, would be great.
Absolutely. Then I will look to the, I think I made the motion in starting the conversation, so would you second it as changed? Thank you very much. Do we have speakers on the consent calendar?
We do have one request to speak.
In person or?
That would be in
Zoom?
person.
All right, let's have that speaker use 2 minutes, please.
Okay. So 2 minutes for Paul Soto, please.
Paul Soto from the Horseshoe. The issue that I have is with the minute orders in this era of making your voice heard, and we want people to be vocal and speak out about what's going on in their lives or what's going on in their communities. The minute orders do not reflect that. These are legal documents. As a historian, I've researched documents. I have to go to different cities, especially this one, and I look back in minute orders or a source of our primary source of material. And when you look at the minute orders, all you see there is a person commented. That's it. That is the only record that we have. So the future, 50 years from now, there's going to be no record in the minute orders that have an objection, that have an assent. What might have that objection have been? Why did this person assent to a particular policy? But yet we're living in a democracy where the primary foundation of that democracy is freedom of speech, but yet that speech is not reflected in county documents. I mean, this is a serious issue because we're living in a democracy, and voices being heard isn't a nonprofit that receives money from the county. That's not a legitimate voice being heard. That is a paid employee. That's what that is. It's a paid employee. But when you are hearing from a citizen that has absolutely no financial incentive to come here, has no axe to grind, other than ensuring that people that have been mistreated and people that have been treated with injustice, that there is a particular voice that is at this table that is able to articulate that effectively. And when it is not reflected in the documents, then it is a denial of those persons' humanity because their voice is not heard. Thank you.
And that concludes our speakers.
Thank you very much. Again, I'm bumping item 10, announcements, to the top of the agenda in order to present a certificate to two special guests in this room, Mark Ashford and Rolando Barron, who led in the creation of a mural entitled Rising, on display at the South County Reentry Resource Center and inspired by the experiences of incarcerated and formerly incarcerated men. This mural could have depicted any aspect of their lives. The fact that the central image is of a man holding up a child truly just knocked my socks off. The centrality of raising children, of literally lifting them up, is a value that crosses all life experiences and situations. So I'd like to invite Mr. Ashford and Mr. Barron to come up and share a bit about their process of creating the mural, and then I will present them with certificates and we can do a quick photo op. But gentlemen, come on up to the public speaker podium.
Do we have a picture of it that we can show?
Cool. My apologies, that was feedback, and that will not happen again. Thank you.
I have PTSD, so.
Sorry.
I'm just kidding.
Give one, and when you're speaking, the microphone is embedded in the podium, so stand right in front of that, please.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, beautiful.
I can just speak right there. Okay. Hi, thanks for this chance to address you guys. Just working with the guys to put this mural together, a few thoughts that came to mind was that they're all really good people that need an opportunity, that are searching for opportunity. And what comes to mind is that poverty breeds crime. So in order to end crime, you need to end poverty. And somewhere along the line, as a society, we failed them. We failed to provide a safety net for them. So they resorted to whatever they had to resort to put them in different situations. I believe that when they show the initiative to get back on their feet and they repay their debt to society, we should welcome them back with open arms as full citizens. And we need to invest in them in order to, like I said, end the poverty that created the crime. So the investment really just takes the creation of opportunity, and that's where you guys come in as the gatekeepers to the city. You guys have the power to create opportunities for them, and this does involve investment, and it's a financial investment that needs to happen. And just what I hate to hear is that there's a wall of money. Living in the Bay Area, you see a lot of money going around. Living in this country, it seems like we're printing more money than the Weimar Republic was. So I fully think that we have enough to invest into them, and the investment will be paid back to us 100-fold. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mark Ashford. So Rising gave me the opportunity to reflect on the dark places I had been throughout my addiction and incarceration. I was fortunate to participate in a custody program in my first term. So basically, Rising, I went into this project not knowing what it was about. It was just offered for me to be a participant because of all the stuff that I went through within my life of 26 years of incarceration. And so being a child without a father and a father not being present. And so when I went to do this, it was actually at the right time because I got the opportunity to adopt my grandson. We brought him home at 14 days old, and excuse me. And so anyways, I went into this project, and I'm like, man, this is like a great opportunity for the places that helped me, which was the reentry and the Now program and the Goodwill and all this stuff, right? And so I took part parenting classes, among other programs. I committed to being an active father for the first time in my life. I have the opportunity to be a positive role model, and thanks to the Reentry, Good Samaritan Project, and Goodwill, I have a successful career in the union, which supports my family today. Without the support to the Reentry Center and my probation officer, I wouldn't be able to be present today, and also I wouldn't be able to be a participant. I'm actually a peer mentor for Carry the Vision now. And so I just want to thank everybody here, and I really appreciate the programs. I know those in-custody programs really do help. For some reason, I wasn't able to participate because I was being a bad boy at one time, and the county jail gave me the opportunity to go ahead and be a participant into the Breaking Barriers program, and that's where I took off at. And I didn't stop there. I went throughout my whole incarceration this last time, and up until my release, and I came out with that same mentality, and I just kept going and going, and this is where I'm at today. 5 years later, I've been clean and sober and living a great life. I thank you all, and thank you for having me here.
Thank you for sharing. Don't go in case anyone wants to ask questions, and then I'll come with the certificate. Supervisor Chavez, did you have a comment or question?
I just wanted to say thank you both very, very much for your work and for being here. It was very powerful.
Thank you.
And it's beautiful, really beautiful.
And let's have Javier from Reentry join us. Right. Do we have other announcements as part of item 10? All right. I neglected to take a vote on item 3 for the consent calendar, so Camille is going to has reminded me to go back and do that. So let's take a vote, please.
And just to be clear, that would be, you would be the mover and Vice Chairperson Chavez is the seconder, correct?
Correct.
Perfect, thank you. And Vice Chairperson Chavez? And Chairperson Ellenberg?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item 4, we approved on consent. Item 5 is a report on the criminal justice high system utilizers, and I believe I'm turning to Deputy County Executive Casey Halcon for the report.
Yes, good morning, Chairperson Ellenberg, Casey Halkin, Deputy County Executive. The report before you provides an analysis of high system utilizers from 2022. The concept of high system utilizers can be approached in many ways. For this report, we looked at high lifetime interaction with law enforcement, but also a continuance of jail bookings in 2022. And this criteria, as listed in your report, yielded 20 individuals. On average, the first law enforcement contact as an adult occurred at about 20 and a half years old, but continued throughout their lifetime. There's quite a large age range for the group. It averages between 42 and 72 years old. The top 3 booking charges in 2022 were violence against a person, which accounted for about 25%, property crimes at about 25%, and then the misdemeanor substance abuse charges, which was at about 20%. 12 of the 20 individuals received services at the Reentry Resource Center since the beginning of 2022, with a majority needing direct services or requesting direct services such as food, clothing, and access to transportation. Administration is recommending further analysis and coordination with criminal justice partners to determine if efforts can be made to identify and address the underlying causes leading to these arrests. For example, 3 of the 20 people had parole violations for failing to register as a sex offender, which accounted for 37 of the 173 charges in 2022. Additionally, 3 of the 20 people had substance abuse-related charges, which accounted for 60 out of the 173 charges in 2022. When combined, those two categories account for more than 50% of the 2022 arrests. Administration is also recommending case conferencing between the Office of Reentry and Diversion Services and county safety net providers, such as Behavioral Health Services Department, Office of Supportive Housing, and the Social Services Agency, to conduct a deeper analysis of these 20 individuals and consider what additional services and interventions could be most useful to disrupt this cycle of jail bookings. We're happy to work with our partners and include an update in our next quarterly report, which is in April. So this does conclude my summary and comments, but I'm happy to answer any questions. And also we have, obviously, the director of our Office of Reentry and Diversion, Javier Aguirre, who's also available to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. I think I'll look first, not seeing any initial lights here, first for public comment, and then we'll come back for committee questions.
There are currently no requests to speak.
No request to speak. All right, then back we are. Supervisor Chavez, do you have questions that you'd like to start with? No? Okay. Thank you, Casey, very much. Thanks for the report. I think the information is really helpful, particularly as we're moving through the ATI work groups and other channels to better understand strategies and resource areas that the county might pursue to end these frequent cycles of incarceration. I know that the lack of available data to facilitate this understanding had been a struggle of the ATI groups, and I really appreciate this information being pulled out from CJIC. At the same time, of course, there's some ongoing work in this area, and I want to make sure that we're not being duplicative. The Reentry Network, on which Supervisor Chavez and I both sit, recently heard a report on a similar pilot for system-involved individuals with executive functioning disorders. And I'm curious about how much overlaps between these samples.
That's an interesting question. When we pulled this data out, we were looking predominantly in CJIC, and so I imagine that further analysis about any behavioral health interventions or particular needs that these individuals would happen at the case conferencing. But certainly when we return back with a further analysis of our 20 individuals, that's something we can cover in a future report as well to see if there's any, I believe that was the fetal alcohol spectrum disorder presentation that you're referencing. So we can do some overlay there to look for any neurodivergence or any particular areas of concern.
Thank you. I think that would be very interesting for all of us to hear, and as well to get an understanding of how many people in this sample of high system utilizers may be eligible for enhanced care management. So
Certainly.
I look forward to hearing more in the next report. Thank you. Are there other questions or comments?
May I?
Please.
Thank you. Just one question. What was the reason around the 150 trigger in terms of it's because it says it was determined that only those with 150 or more lifetime bookings would be reviewed?
So that was mostly determined in order to get the population down to a narrow size and one that could be evaluated to begin with. The intention with this data report, in speaking with Program Manager Melanie Jimenez-Perez, who I want to thank for assisting me with this, is to do this more frequently and to be able to, every 6 months or so, look at our high system utilizers to be able to do some targeted case conferencing around individuals who we see returning into our jail and our system. But to do that, we had to get it to a manageable number for the case conferencing for the deep dive on those individuals. And as you'll notice from the table on page 2, when you get below 150, you can get a much larger number. And so we did the 150 cap and above, again, to get it to a number that we could look at and was more manageable for the initial first deep dive.
So one concern I have with that is that sometimes if the number is too small, you can't see trends. And so, a concern I have, and I think that it's just one that we should be thinking a little bit more about is, how do we take a look at these numbers in a way that give the perspective that we're really trying to figure out how you match services with need? And so when this comes back, and there's not, I didn't see it in the report, what would be the next, what's the next slice of this that gets us to the place where we want to be evaluating, you know, where we can really have a look at what the implications of this are?
That's certainly something that's a great point that we can include in our next report to look at, if I'm understanding you correctly. Okay, so we do high system is 150 and above, but then look at, 125 to 150, 75 to 125. Are you looking at to kind of see who falls into those brackets of lower than 150 and get a better idea of the full exposure of the people that we're seeing that have repeat bookings, but you want the number to be lower?
Well, I guess what I would just say is that 150 is a relatively
Very,
high number.
yes.
I mean, so if you're an average person looking at these numbers, you think, oh my goodness, why is it that we have interaction with somebody
Absolutely. 150
times? And I think this goes back really to the point that Supervisor Ellenberg was just raising, is that I think, one of the things that we've been really examining, as you know, with reentry is we have subpopulations that have very specific needs that we
Yes.
can't address, actually, that our first speaker mentioned. And so I think what I worry about is that number, to me, is already a problem. Like, that says, wow, we have a problem. So I don't know what the right number is, but to get down to 20, I mean, if what we're worried about is how do we get our arms around the problem, I guess what I would be asking staff to think about is what's the appropriate pool so that you really can look at trends. And it would give you an opportunity to look back maybe with some specificity on a few folks, because 20 is a subset. Like, if you had,
Sure.
we were looking at 200 people, and we said, you know what, we're going to take a look at these 20 people, because we're going to start in 1970 to see what have been all the interactions, what have been the interventions. That makes more sense, but this doesn't actually say much to me.
I have a comment on that, but I want to turn it over to our Chief Operating Officer.
I was just going to say what I take from your comment, which is that there's different cohorts that are also going to present different problems. So these are sort of our exceptional high system utilizers, and what might be the response to that group that might be worth looking at is going to be different than, I think, what your point is also, which is look at some broader trends to also see where we have some system deficiencies. I was just going to mention, I think trying to figure out how to create a number of different analyses that can give us different indications of where we have some opportunities for system improvement is really worthwhile. We did some similar super high system utilizers work, as you know very well, in the context of our homeless folks who are touching jail, healthcare, and we were able to divine some really useful insights about how do we better meet the needs of some of the folks that really have extraordinary contact with our system, but that doesn't give us a complete picture of other opportunities that we have to improve the system for what might be a much larger cohort of folks who have really different needs and opportunities. And so one of the things I think we're all really excited about is having increased the capacity of some of the analytic work we can do in these spaces to really do multiple different cuts. And then to Casey's point, part of the goal behind this was to get a manageable number of folks to then look specifically at what might be happening that might require a better and different intervention for this specific cohort of folks. But we can definitely do broader analyses and then pick a couple representative folks in a much broader trend and then kind of look there. So Casey, you can speak to this more, but I think this is just sort of one of many cuts at that really high-end system utilizers to see what we might have opportunities to do for that group, but totally agree that it is not a representative sample of where there might be opportunities that could also impact a much broader cohort of our
Well, I'm actually
population.
thinking very specifically about the high-end user, because I guess what I would be interested in, and this, I'm interested in all your perspective on this, which is how would we identify somebody that's a high system user? If it's not, I mean, to me, I have a hard time knowing if it's 150. I mean, to me, what do we think a high system user is? And then let's do the analysis of that group. And I think part of the one of the points that that I'm really thinking a lot about is that I worry about the pendulum swinging back in terms of public opinion, and I think actually one of our speakers talked about this earlier. If we don't have the ability to appropriately support this high-end group of folks, because this is this is going to be the issue that keeps getting thrown kind of in our faces about why the system isn't working. They're not going to be the stories of this incredible gentleman that was here earlier. It's really it's this group. So I don't know what the right number is, but I would like that to be decided by a cross-section of our public safety and justice teams that include the public defender and the ADO and the sheriff and the district attorney's office. And then I would like an analysis that says, this is how we're determining a high-end user. Here's what we're seeing in terms of their interaction with public safety. And here's what we're recommending, because these are the trends that we can see, whether it's behavioral health, drug and alcohol abuse. And the other thing that I think is going to be really critical is being able to have a sub-target that says, for example, I worry about this a lot as it relates to domestic violence, but there are a lot of beliefs in our community around under what circumstances someone is violent. I don't know the answer to that based on this high-need population. And just for my colleagues that don't sit on reentry, although some of you may, that's part of what we're looking at in terms of the high-end users that are women in our custody. Our custody. So, I appreciate this as a, as a first step. But I think I'm very interested in what you all think a high user is. Then what's the appropriate circle of analysis? And I do just want to say, I don't know if Melanie's here because I don't have my glasses on. That I know I feel like you're the little engine that every time someone has a question, we dump stuff on you and say, hey, analyze this. So I'm also suggesting that if we need help doing this, let's do it, because to me, it's one of the most critical questions that we have got to answer.
Yeah, we were very lucky this year. We invested in data analytics through the Pretrial Services Department, and so we have Dean Yamasaki and Julie Bork, who've been very helpful with gathering all this information for PSJC, but also for REN and the board more broadly as we're looking at public safety and justice. So we can meet with the analytical team and find out how we can best search the fields that we have, and to Greta's point about the analytics, and broaden our search and work with our criminal justice partners for a broader cohort. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Thanks, colleagues.
Thank you both. Do you want to put that in the form of a motion?
Yes, why, yes, I will. Supervisor Ellenberg, I would ask that the staff through the county executive work with our public safety and justice partners to determine what a high utilizer is, and to use whatever resources are needed. And if there are more resources needed, that the chair is alerted so we can make that available, so we can do an appropriate level of analysis for high users of our system. That would be my motion.
I will second that and look to all committee members for any additional input at this time. Are you nodding at me, Sylvia, because you have a comment?
I was nodding because I think the most important starting point is actually the scrutiny into this population, because the bottom line is that we have a lot of people that circle into the system, and there isn't one person that is seeking to identify them as a high-end user. They are identified separately from all the people, different people that touch the individual, probation, pretrial services, behavioral health, but nobody has the leadership or role to be able to say, this is another individual, he's back, what are the issues, what's happened with him this time, what happened the first time, what didn't work. And I think because there are so many different layers to getting to the root cause of what's driving the behavior or what's driving the individual, there needs to be the statistics, which is the trends, which is what we're talking about, but the deep dive actually has to be to who knows the individual best, who understands the individual's context and narrative, who understands their life timeline, that then draws us in to then understand the individual. Because we will see trends, and the trends we can predict. That is youthful trauma, that is contact with the FCS, that is, learning disabilities from youth, that is, early incarceration or mental health or substance abuse or undiagnosed mental health issues. All of those things we will know, but that's only going to be the beginning. It's not going to be but what is the root cause that's bringing this individual into the system, and what other alternatives have we missed, like the behavioral health door that keeps being shut at that individual, for example. So I really appreciate this, but I do think that it has to be an ongoing responsibility of one individual in our system that is going to have to identify, and I'm not pointing at you, no, but that is in charge of the individuals and can see the individuals from that, whether it be the sheriff's office or whether it be probation or whether it be pretrial services, that is going to look at it from that sort of caring, helpful lens.
Sheriff Johnson.
Or Supervisor Chavez, do I get to speak?
I know, I kept cutting him off at reentry.
It's an inside thing. She missed me last time, but that's okay. Actually, I really appreciate this report, but it's interesting from my view, my perspective, is that maybe you've looked at it, but it would also be very interesting to see, based on your analysis, you used 150 as a criteria plus booking in 2022-23. Be interesting to see how many individuals reach that 150 criteria of lifetime bookings, but were not rearrested. Because I do believe there's a tremendous opportunity to look at what prompted them not to get rearrested. Were there programs that they participated? And I think, to your point, the question needs to constantly be asked for these individuals as they come back into the system, where they're at in their life. Is there a program that you may be receptive to now, just as we heard earlier, after 25 years, the birth of a grandson, the moment in time, he was open to those programs that were offered in the county systems. So I think that's a question that I would like to definitely be part of analyzing, because I think it gives us an opportunity to see how we can build our programs and make them accessible from day one inside a county system to hopefully prepare them for when they're released. So thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just add, I think one of the other things that would be important for the group to identify is what is the problem we're trying to solve? And I actually think there are kind of three large buckets. One is how we're investing countywide in intervention programs early. It's part of the reason Supervisor Ellenberg and I have been so focused on the Child Advocacy Office. I never remember the name of it. Anyway, that office that's working with kids, because what I think countywide is that we need to be looking at a percentage of all of the investments that we're making that are going to be invested in prevention activities, because it's all the things that, Sylvia, that you just talked about.
It's the root cause.
Root cause, absolutely. The middle section here is what opportunities are for meaningful interventions when we've missed somebody and all of that other piece, and what those interventions look like, and how we're making investments today in both our mental health and our public safety infrastructure and service provision that can or should be able to address this group of folks. And then the last is, how are we working with all of our public safety partners to make sure that we're addressing public safety writ large relative to some subset of these folks who are going to continue to be dangerous to the community, irrespective of all of the different opportunities, barriers, or redirection that can be put in place. And for me, one of the reasons this particular population is so important is that better understanding who ends up in our system because of untreated mental health issues, who's in our system because of continued drug and alcohol addiction, and who's in our system because irrespective of those two things, they continue to demonstrate criminogenic behavior, and we have to find a way to make sure that they're not continuing to harm the community. And I think, so I say that because the reason I'm looking at these broader numbers, this subset of people, which is a relatively small subset of people that we interact with day in and day out in our public safety and justice system, need some special attention. And that will require a lot more collaboration, not just for the people around this table, but the other public safety departments throughout the county. So I share that because I do think that the point that Sylvia raised, I think you're right. We know the answer. The question really is, how are all of our other systems really responding throughout the county to make sure that we're doing our very best to change the future? But I just want to, the reason I'm saying this about this particular issue is that we do have while it's not a substantial group of people relative to our population, it is a substantial group of people that are using a lot of resources. And we have got to understand that because we're spending a lot of money and a lot of time and energy on a relatively small group of people. And I think it's tainting the way the broader public looks at the opportunities we have to really support people who don't need to be in this path. So I just share that because I want everybody to understand the outcome of this particular dive that I'm interested in.
Thank you. Before I turn to Greta, Supervisor Chavez, I just want to kind of hone in on one small piece of what you said. The broad picture, I absolutely agree with in addressing the different buckets. It's different to do preventative root cause work than looking for services and supports later. But the 150 people that were the subjects of this report are really recommended as the best alternatives to, or the best options to fit for alternatives to incarceration because many of them are aging, because they're specifically not posing a threat to the public anymore. So I just want, to sunshine who we are talking about here. We're not looking at options for people who truly do pose a dangerous or physical threat to the community at large.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Greta, and then back to Sylvia.
The only other thing I was going to add is, there's been actually a really rich and growing body of national research on high system utilizers. So in addition to looking at our own data, and to Supervisor Chavez's point earlier about much larger data sets also yielding different insights about trends, I think it would serve us well to look at some of that really significant body of growing research. The other thing I would say, just about the point around folks who are showing up in our system for 2022, part of what that body of research shows is that periods of that the people are often super high system utilizers only for a very brief period of time in their life, where their life has truly fallen apart, and really regardless of intervention, people tend to go back down to the mean. So anyway, one of the things that I think would be worth looking at that literature to see is sort of what it shows about who is that cohort. I had come to that body of literature assuming you would see a couple people who would over many years continue to be high system utilizers. The research tends to show that it's a different group of people at any given moment in time who are those super utilizers, and then they tend to go down after a brief period where kind of all hell has broken loose in their life, and then things sort of stabilize. So that's just, I think, an interesting and important thing for us to think about as we look at high system utilizers, actually across a lot of domains, public safety and justice being one, health system utilization, behavioral health services utilization, homeless services utilization. That trend, as I understand it, shows up across all of those types of high system utilizers.
Thank you. Sylvia.
One thing that it's actually the most critical point that we need to take away from this, and that is if you look at the chart from the highest active charge in 2022 for this population, and you look at the misdemeanor, the felony violation of probation or parole, the other crimes category, we still have 40% of these individuals that came in for a non-serious, non-violent, and they still came into our jail. Mm-hmm. And so I think that is a huge component of our analysis, and especially as we look at the greater number, because one key question should be is, should they have been coming in the first place? Because again, we don't want to have our justice system be the replacement and the safety net for services because the other systems have failed. And I think that's a huge component of our work. Otherwise, I think our good intentions about providing treatment and all of that are great. But the problem is that we're widening the net of those individuals that need to be coming into our system in the first place. And that is a huge problem. that I think we just cannot underestimate. And I think that is where we need to drill down, both for this analysis of high system users, for the alternatives to incarceration, and also for how we're using our jails, period.
Thank you. Your points are excellent, Sylvia. Supervisor Chavez.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I would just say is that a couple of things that I think may be different relative to utilization. And one is that we have more people who are suffering homelessness over longer periods of time than we did in the past. And so where somebody may have been, in a really tragic situation, peaked and then valleyed, we have people who are in distress much longer periods of time. And so my expectation is that we're going to see that trend change. So that's one concern. And then the other that I just want to make an observation about is that, again, part of the reason I'm so interested in the information is for some people, this goes really back to our behavioral health work that you've been leading on and our substance abuse work. Our inability to respond quickly to somebody who needs, who's ready for rehabilitation and how long it takes us to get somebody into a program is so unacceptable that one of the other questions in my mind would be whether or not, here where it says services requested, how the service was actually met or not met. That to me is a really key question. And then the other is that as we're talking about the reconstruction of a jail, is whether or not we really are looking at something that, what are really the alternatives that are most appropriate? Because I think we are now living in an environment where people's needs are the continuum is so much broader than it was. And maybe, again, because we have people who are suffering longer, who are without services. So I think there's a lot of validity in in this discussion. I do want to just raise that I do worry, I continue to worry about, one thing that doesn't show here is how people are actually charged. Sometimes, some categories do have violence in them that we're not quantifying that necessarily as violent. And I just, again, want to make sure that we're thinking about recidivism in its broadest sense, because again, we have to have as our highest aspiration as public safety, along with maintaining civil liberties, right? Like that's really what our jobs are. So the research will, I think, help us make better decisions. So anyway, this has been really helpful discussion for me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all. Keep looking this way to make sure I'm not missing anyone to my right. Let's take a vote on Supervisor Chavez's motion, please.
It's like waiting for all you all to vote.
Vice Chairperson Chavez?
Yes.
And Chairperson Ellenberg?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. We are moving on to item 6, which is the report on the criminal court case backlog. And before I turn this over to Assistant District Attorney James Given Shapiro, I want to just set a little bit of context. My intention in approving this item for today's agenda was really to draw on the strengths of this policy committee. I think we have virtually everyone we need on this dais to solve tough challenges and to break down barriers that may hinder the pursuit of justice in our community. And I've always viewed this committee in particular as a place to develop shared understandings of our diverse and sometimes siloed perspectives so that we can move forward with some consensus on issues that have system-wide impacts for the betterment of all. And I'll note from the county perspective, we're interested in discussing the court backlog in part because of its significant financial impact on our general fund in holding people longer in custody or keeping them on community surveillance for longer periods of time, as well as, of course, the humanitarian impacts on individuals themselves that impact their ability to thrive as members of our community. The county also covers additional personnel costs in nearly all of our PSJC departments. So this is a nut I believe we should all be interested in cracking. And I want to be clear as well that we are here to learn and to be supportive of strategies that the court is pursuing. And I'll look forward to hearing Judge Emity's input and perspective on this discussion after the report, which granted the report is through the lens of the district attorney's office. So with that, James, you are on. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Supervisor Ellenberg, Supervisor Chavez, esteemed members of the Public Safety and Justice Committee. I'm told that the way to share my PowerPoint is through Zoom, so I've done that. All right, excellent. Get this. All right, I want to first start with what is an extreme part of our criminal court backlog. And these are cases that are set for trial where the defense has invoked their right to a speedy trial. So the lingo in the courthouse is that's a time not waived case. So a case where the defense has invoked their right to a speedy trial. In March of 2020, we were in a situation where it was rare that criminal cases were set for time not waived jury trial, that most trials that were tried in our county were time-waived cases where the defense was not setting it, invoking their right to a speedy trial, but that a trial date could be obtained and a trial to go out without doing that. Beginning in 2021, there began to be a dramatic increase in the number of cases that are set for trial where the defense has invoked their right to speedy trial. It hit a peak in January of 2022. There was a lot of progress made through the summer of 2022, but I'm sad to report to you that the trend has gone the other way since August of 2022, and that since that time, the number of cases in the time not waived backlog have increased. And they've increased for misdemeanors, which, as Judge Emity knows, because she's our relatively new presiding judge for domestic violence cases, that the misdemeanors are, at this point, a little bit half our domestic violence misdemeanors are the time not waived cases. At other points during that yellow line, it was as high as 70% of the time not waived cases were domestic violence misdemeanors. And some of you know, but I'll just say for all of you, that misdemeanor cases in general in our county are out of custody cases. So these are cases where people are out of custody. The gray line at the bottom is felony cases. So there's 127 cases as of about 2 weeks ago that are set for time not waived jury trial where the defendant is charged with a felony. Now a little bit about the data, and I'm going to try to source where the data is from throughout. This data comes from the court's case management system, Odyssey. It takes about an hour and a half to count up these cases, and the DA's office does that periodically. And so we've been happy to provide for the public and safety justice community what is the state of the time not waived backlog since June of 2021, and it's just a count of the cases set for trial time not waived through the court's case management system. Of course, I started with the most extreme, cases where the defense has invoked their right to a speedy trial. There's a lot of cases set for trial where the defense has not invoked their right to a speedy trial. So, and this chart is showing both that there are time waived trials set, and also that number has increased just since November. So in November, there were 1,324 cases that were set for trial where the defense has not invoked their right to a speedy trial. 802 of them were felonies. And by now, there were 1,460 cases where their case was set for trial, the defense has not invoked their right to a speedy trial, and the total number of felonies, 991, across time waived and time not waived cases. You might ask yourself, what is a practical difference between a case that's where the defense has invoked their right to a speedy trial or not invoked their right to a speedy trial? And since March of 2020, the practical difference has been there have been no cases that have gone to trial in Santa Clara County where the defense has not invoked their right to a speedy trial. So let me just say that again. If the defense has not invoked their right to a speedy trial and yet wants to have a trial in the case, 0 of those cases have gone to trial in about 3 years. And so that time waived backlog is another indicator of the growing number of these cases. And if you can see the number of felonies there, so I'll say that for misdemeanors, the great majority, 90% plus, are out of custody. For felonies, that's a mixture of in custody and out of custody cases. And actually, a lot of those time waived felony trials are in custody cases. I'm going to just back up one. Well, no, I'll just go forward. All right, so this is about trial courtrooms. So this is point-in-time data. So the court periodically provides all partners in the criminal justice system with a judicial assignments list. So this is looking at the judicial assignments list for January of 2019 and comparing that to the judicial assignments list in January of 2023. And it's a stark number, is that the number of courtrooms assigned to criminal cases has gone down. Now, that's not because the courts have removed criminal courtrooms and transferred them to civil court or family court. This is part of an overall reduction in the number of available courtrooms in our county, and that's for a variety of reasons. I think one of those reasons is that there's not enough funding for court staff for the number of judges that are funded for Santa Clara County, so court clerks, court reporters, court bailiffs across the whole system. And as a result, we have, in criminal court, we have situations where we have available judges, but unfortunately they do not have court staff. And so the courts have tried to be very creative on how to use those judges to try to help move cases along. But the practical reality is that there's fewer courtrooms than there were before the pandemic. So what about trial courtrooms? So this is, again, point-in-time data. So this is looking at any particular week. So this is for looking at a week in January 2019. There were 18 courtrooms that were available where a judge could be assigned a trial. And in 2023, in January, that number of courtrooms on any particular week is 13. Now, you could count this number another way by counting it, how many judges rotate through different trial assignments, and there's more judges than 13 who rotate through trial assignments. But if you do that, you have to do that also for 2019. So both of those numbers would go up if you counted it a different way, but this is a point-in-time way of counting that. The court capacity is a problem, and not just for trials, but for all sorts of hearings. So this is an example of preliminary hearings. So in a felony case, in order for a case to be set for trial, there's a preliminary hearing. A judge is making a decision whether there is sufficient evidence to hold the case for trial. And there's not enough judges to handle the volume of cases that are set for preliminary hearings. And so what happens is the cases there's also a right to a speedy preliminary hearing. The cases get set for time not waived preliminary hearing. And the case gets set for hearing, but if you ever want to see a definition of chaos, is to show up to a courtroom that's assigned to a preliminary hearings any morning of any day of the week. And what you'll see is way more cases assigned to that courtroom for preliminary hearing than the judge could possibly do. And so the judge is trying very hard to resolve cases that have been set for preliminary hearing and to hold preliminary hearings. These are evidentiary hearings where there's testimony. But because of the capacity, these cases get continued to another date. And there's a real, it's not just a system cost to that. So when you have a preliminary hearing, it's an evidentiary hearing. In a domestic violence case, in a sexual assault case, the victims are coming to these courtrooms and then have to come back again on another day when there's not capacity to hear their case. The police officers are not on patrol because they're coming to court and then they have to come back to court again. So they understand it's part of their job to come to court. It's a frustrating and difficult situation when they have to keep coming back to court for the same hearing because there's not sufficient court capacity. Another related issue related to capacity, and I'm not going to go through all these points, I just want to start with the wait time between court dates if the case is not time not waived, meaning if the defense has not invoked their right to a speedy trial. So on felony cases, if you don't waive time, the amount of time between court dates is months at a time. So it's not 4 weeks, it's not 6 weeks, it's months at a time. And it's even worse for our domestic violence cases, misdemeanor cases, where if the defense does not invoke their right to a speedy trial, now some of the wait times are 4 months, 5 months, 6 months in order to get another court date. So I don't want to say that I don't want to imply that we should be blaming counsel for the defense for setting so many cases time not waived. I think one of the challenges that they have is that if they don't set their case time not waived, they don't get a court date for months. And so that's a challenge throughout the whole system related to court capacity. I want to reiterate some of the custody issues I talked about. So 90% of the in custody cases pending resolution. So you know this from your daily jail population report. If you look at what's the mix of people in the county jail, and the majority of people are awaiting resolution of their cases, and 90% of those people are awaiting resolution of their cases on a felony case. For the cases that are set, let's look at the time not waived backlog. The time not waived trial backlog, which is dominated by misdemeanors, are almost all out of custody cases. So part of this problem is causing a problem that we're feeling in our jail, that the lack of capacity to deal with cases in a timely way, because we're focusing so much attention on time not waived cases, which we should because of the defense's right to a speedy trial, that lack of capacity has caused further delays in resolution of cases where the defendant is in custody. You might think that part of this problem is that the Office of the District Attorney has dramatically increased the number of criminal cases that we've filed during this time, that the capacity issues have gone bananas because we've filed way more cases. But actually, the number of criminal cases that the Office of District Attorney has filed during this time period has dramatically fallen. And these are a result of some very important reforms that DA Rosen has put in place, criminal justice system reforms, racial justice system reforms that have dramatically reduced the number of criminal cases we filed. So, for example, I'll give 3 examples of that. One is our narcotics public safety policy that DA Rosen enacted a few years ago. It said we're not going to have the courts be the middleman between someone and treatment. We're not going to have people come into court and have a DA and a public defender and a judge all there saying, please go to treatment. Instead, we're going to refer the person to treatment and say, if you don't get treatment, if you continue to have a problem, if you get 3 cases within 12 months, now we're going to file a criminal case. But other than that, we're not going to have the courts be the middleman between the person and drug treatment. That's a huge reduction in misdemeanor filings. Another is our increase of pre-filing diversion for trespassing and petty theft cases. Another reason is a reduction in cases where, well, I'll just say across the board different kinds of cases. I could probably go on a long time about that reduction. But the practical reality is that misdemeanor cases, while the backlog has increased, the filings of misdemeanor cases decreased 43% during this time. And felonies, although they held relatively steady, the felony filings are about the same. It's a 5% reduction during this time. So I just want to end with a couple points, and I'll be glad to take any questions from the group. When we were at the height of the pandemic in Santa Clara County, our hospital system, like hospital systems around the country, said we have a surge and we need surge capacity. And they increased surge beds to deal with a temporary crisis. This is not unique to the hospital system. When retailers know that there is going to be a surge of customers, they hire seasonal help to make sure that they have the capacity to deal. Well, we're having a surge right now. We have a surge right now. It's based in part on the fact that the courts had to dramatically reduce their availability in 2020 and early 2021. And it's based in part in that now that they're back, they're not actually back to where they were in 2019 as far as their staffing and their funding. But the point I want to make to you is that this problem is not going to go away by us doing the things that we've been doing before, and that we have to find a way to build surge capacity to deal with the surge that we've got in court backlogs that are causing problems for victims, for our community, for the courts, for caseloads at the public defender's office, which Damon knows have skyrocketed, even though the number of criminal cases have gone down. And that's because there's more cases that are pending in the system waiting for resolutions. Thank you.
James, thank you very much for that very clear and an eye-opening report. I'm going to go to the public first for comments, and then I expect there will be lots from the dais.
We have one in-person request and none virtually.
All right, 2 minutes, please.
Okay. I would like to call Paul Soto to give your public comment. Thank you.
Yes, also from Horseshoe. I'd like to talk about, discuss this within the context of the Constitution, is that the 5th and 14th Amendments, it states very clearly that a person cannot be deprived of liberty without due process of law. And the due process is embedded in the speedy trial dynamic, that when I ask for a speedy trial, I should be taken in front of a judge, have a trial within 60 days, period. That's it, that's all. There's no debate on that. These are very clear laws that identify us as Americans. That's not happening. In 2010, I went to trial. It took me 10 months on a speedy trial calendar. 10 months. I never waived my time. From arraignment to actual trial, never waived time. It took 10 months because there's a lot of gamesmanship that goes on inside of the courtroom, where either by the public defender's office or the district attorney's office, they're not prepared. So what they do, ask for delays, ask for delay, ask for delay. Those delays add up in violation of the due process of law, that you cannot deny somebody their liberty without that due process. That due process it becomes very nebulous inside the court systems, because there's all this language that's being used, and the defendant is not educated around those things. We had to educate ourselves. That's what I did. I educated myself around the law because I knew that there was violations, and that's why I didn't plead. No, I'm not pleading guilty to something that I know that I did not do. And I won. I beat it. And so it is effective in the sense that if a person takes it to trial, that the court will find the person innocent. That has worked. However, when we're talking about due process and depriving people of their constitutional right to a trial, and we deny them that, then it's a violation. Thank you.
Okay. And that concludes our speakers.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn first to Judge Emity.
Thank you. All right, first, let me say that we welcome a discussion regarding the court's backlogs. We recognize the issue, we are working on the issue, and it's certainly something that is a concern for us as well. Let me also say that we had no input on the numbers that were reported. I hear you, Mr. Gibbons-Shapiro, saying you got those from Odyssey, which is our system, and so I appreciate that. But we had no knowledge that the report was being put together or the proposal was being put together, quite frankly. We don't have any reason to disbelieve the numbers. I do think that there are, for example, with respect to the number of courtrooms, there was a little footnote that dropped that said that there are 3 judges that also are serving in the criminal division that don't have a staff. That doesn't mean that those judges aren't doing something very productive. So really that number is 37 and not 34. But again, I don't think that we're here to talk about which numbers are the right numbers and which numbers are the wrong numbers. I don't think that's the issue. I think it's very important to say that the court is not limited in our ability to handle criminal trials due to shortages of the court's staff. So thanks to funding decisions that we made last summer for our 2022-2023 budget, we prioritized and have now hired courtroom clerks such that we don't have any situation where we can't hold a trial because we don't have a courtroom clerk. That was the case during COVID. It was very painful for us, but that is no longer a reason why we can't staff a courtroom. We do not have a courtroom clerk shortage at this time. We acknowledge that we have now and will continue to have shortages of court reporters. That is a statewide and a national problem, and that is not likely to improve. For departments where we are simply unable to secure a court reporter, we will use electronic recording so that we don't consider court reporters to be a limitation on opening courtrooms. Where we do have a significant shortage is in sheriff's deputy staffing. I know we've talked about that at this meeting before. As Judge McGowan has previously said, our contract is for 160 deputies. Prior to COVID, we regularly ran with 120. We think that's probably actually the proper number. During COVID, we had about 96 average on a daily basis. Last July, our numbers dropped to 72. We have an estimated 35 to 40 criminal, traffic, mental health, juvenile, and collaborative courts running every single day. Our civil and family divisions run primarily remote. In other words, there's not a deputy in the courtroom, and they're on teams. And nobody is allowed into the courtroom except the judge and the court staff. Our old courthouse building, the beautiful old courthouse, is completely closed because we have prioritized deputies in the courtrooms over having deputies at a metal detector at the old courthouse. And all proceedings in that building happen by remote proceeding. We are working very closely and collaboratively with the Sheriff's Department, so I'm not pointing fingers, as you said. That's not my intention. I'm talking about our reality. We know that the Sheriff's Office is stretched thin. They have demands to staff VTA and other community-based contracts, and we recognize that. And we will continue to work collaboratively with the Sheriff's Office on all of that. So the reality is we don't have the capacity for surge beds because we can't staff them with enough deputies. And I think everybody would agree that we're not going to run a criminal courtroom without a deputy. I should also mention that sometimes the barrier we run into is not enough attorneys to handle the trials. So sometimes an attorney will have multiple cases, and they're ready for trial, but only one can go out at a time. The same is true when we talk about preliminary hearings. When we talk about those continuances for preliminary hearings, I don't know that we have data that says how much of that is because the defendant asked for that continuance, or how much that's because an attorney is unavailable. But there was a sort of a general impression given that the reason why all of those preliminary hearings are continued was due to court unavailability. I will admit that I've been back in criminal for about 30 days, so I don't have the longest time there to talk about that. But that has not been my experience so long as I've been there. I have not continued any preliminary hearings because the court was unavailable. And that's whether it's time waived or time not waived. We have continued them at the request of the parties. I should also sort of mention in here that COVID still exists. We have days when attorneys are not available because they're out with COVID. We have witnesses that are out with COVID, and we have defendants who can't be brought to court because they have COVID, whether they're in custody or out of custody. So that's part of our reality too. As much as we are trying to operate in a post-COVID world, COVID still exists. Having said all of that, and regardless of what the right numbers might be, we are putting our focus on trying to address the issue with the time not waived and time waived cases. I should take another little detour. It is my estimation, and I would invite you to tell me if you think I'm wrong, but about 95% of cases and maybe 96 or 97% of cases resolve without a trial. You think that's about the right ballpark, somewhere in there?
Judge, that's absolutely true. And also, I want to let you finish what you're saying, and I'll elaborate on that too.
Fair enough. So, in terms of the court's immediate efforts in order to address what's going on with our backlogs, one, similar to the conversation you were having earlier, is data analytics. We are in the midst of a giant attempt to gather enough data to help us identify where the problems are and address those problems. The state is, the bench on a statewide level is interested in that. We are very interested in that. I in particular am very interested in that kind of thing. Give me a good spreadsheet. I love a good spreadsheet. So we're working on that. There are other specific things we're doing. As I mentioned earlier, we hired courtroom clerks so that that would never be a limitation. As part of the way Judge McGowan structured our courtroom assignments for 2023, We dedicated 4 specific departments to misdemeanor trials, 2 in the regular misdemeanor departments and 2 in family violence. Again, in my vast 30 days in family violence this time around, I was in family violence about 10 years ago. We have had, on average, somewhere between 75 and high 80s matters set for misdemeanor trial every Monday. We do then go through a process which we call a shakedown, where we have the parties come in, we see if there are any resolutions, we see if parties have witnesses, et cetera, and see if a case is actually ready to go to trial. In the month since those departments have been open, we have not continued a single trial due to any trial court unavailability. Either the cases have resolved or the cases have gone out to trial. So again, that's a very short sample. I recognize that. My point being, we've restructured so that we can try to bring these in quite frankly, numbers that are very hard to manage. 80 cases on a shakedown calendar between 2 departments is an awful lot of cases with an awful lot of defendants and witnesses and dynamics. We did also open 2 departments in Morgan Hill. There are reasons why I know that there's a desire for us to do the same in Palo Alto. There are reasons why, at the moment, that's not really very possible, including a lack of parking for any jurors. We can talk about that if that's necessary. Again, I just want to emphasize that in response to the suggestion that we should devote all courtrooms to criminal cases, I want to note that we are mostly unable to send overflow criminal cases to our Civil and Family Division because those are remote departments and they cannot be opened. So we're unable to send them there. We could, but have so far chosen not to, and I say could, maybe not saying that it's very practical. The only one other way to have more criminal trial departments available using the available deputy pool that we have would be to send misdemeanor trials to our mental health courts and our collaborative courts and our drug treatment court, which I think that would serve a lot of the other things that we're here to talk about. So lastly, let me say that we always welcome the opportunity to collaborate with the county and the district attorney's office and the public defender's office. And we are committed to that. We're appreciative of the fact, despite the conversation that we might be having, this county is amazing in the way that we do collaborate that way. We are unable as a court to accept funding that would be tied to tangible improvements in the speed of cases, which was the request that was made in that report. That would affect our ability to be impartial. It's just simply that's it's not permissible, not proper. But we do welcome opportunity to continue the conversation, to make sure that where we're focusing our efforts is accomplishing what we hope it's accomplishing. And we all want the backlog to be better. It's also not that fun for us to be shaking down 40 cases on a Monday morning. It's a lot to get through, and we want that to be a proper experience for the people in front of us. Most importantly, the defendants and the witnesses in front of us, to make sure that they're getting the justice that they're entitled to, as Mr. Soto has pointed out a number of times. So I know I've gone on for a long time. I had a lot I needed to say, but I'm happy to take any questions or address any other issues I might not have addressed.
Thank you very much. I want to just ask, I know Mr. Gibbons-Shapiro had some follow-up comments to yours, and I know that we've talked about the deputy sheriff issue before, and my understanding was that there were conversations about other security personnel that the county would be open to paying for as Sheriff Johnson rebuilds his staff. Could you update us, Greta, on that?
Sure, I can give a brief update, and the sheriff might also want to weigh in on that. But one of the things that we've done, I think consistent with some of the strategies the courts used for their personnel, is to try and look at the areas where we're currently using sheriff's deputies, where we might be able to safely and appropriately use another type of staff, thereby freeing up a deputy to go serve in a role that only a deputy is appropriate to serve. So for example, we've shifted to using non-deputy based security staff for some of the roles bringing people in for screening as they enter courthouses, having a deputy paired with non-deputy staff, so it's still an appropriately secured entrance, but that you're not using deputies to, for example, do the purse passing and some of the screening that other staff can appropriately do. And the sheriff can speak to this, but some of the transitions that we're making currently, we're using contractors for that purpose, but as we're able to bring in the staff that the board approved, that would be the PSO staff that can support the sheriff's office, also create pathways for more staff to enter, work for the sheriff, and hopefully then become deputies, that those would be additional resources. But there are limits on how we can use non-deputy staff for court security. And so the similar to the challenge the court has faced, and as Judge Emity mentioned, I'm aware of this as well, there's just a shortage of people who are qualified to be court reporters. That's not so even in an abundance of funding, we don't have enough people who actually have that training to meet the need. We obviously also have a challenge with that with our sheriff's deputies. So there's some problems we're going to have to get creative to solve in other ways, because the some of the resources that we've traditionally used are just not as fully available as we'd like them to be, regardless of some kind of funding challenges. And I know I'll defer to my colleagues, but I also know that there's really some wonderful creative problem solving going on between the district attorney's office and the public defender's office on how to create some of the circumstances that allow cases that really ultimately won't go to trial but need to get close to trial to actually be subject for discussion that leads to resolution. So appreciative of those sorts of strategies that are also being employed, but I'll defer to the colleagues who can speak to some of those other efforts more specifically.
Thank you.
I can definitely speak to the staffing challenges and to, first of all, really appreciate the court's collaboration and understanding with the staffing issues. I do think they're doing an amazing job with what they have, and the communication between our office and the courts and the judges, and really seeing where they need the staffing on any particular day. But that strategy, that approach is not sustainable, and it really makes it more challenging to forecast what we're going to have 2 months from now. We've already started talking internally, and we addressed this in budget conversations yesterday. Some of the staffing is attributed to budget reductions of 2020, where some of that court staffing was taken out of the organization. And at the time, it was probably appropriate because the courts weren't open. But now that they really have this desire to open up, we need to restaff those positions. But it still goes to having the people to staff those positions. And then to Greta's point, we are utilizing law enforcement technicians right now to staff some of the non-critical positions. And what that means for especially members of the community wondering, well, if there's, and I'll give an example of 95 courtrooms, why can't we have 95 deputies to outfit that? Well, the reality is it takes more than 95 to outfit it. And to the judge's point, that 160 number, which is now really about 120, that's divvied up between the deputies who have to be in the courts, the deputies processing, the deputies screening. There's multiple positions. And the reality is some courts require more than one deputy to be in there, depending on the case that's being. So that takes tremendous, tremendous coordination. But one of the things we're looking to do is not only expand the law enforcement technician positions to free up some of those non-critical positions, to take advantage of the protective service officer positions that we're building out, but also look at how we're onboarding personnel. And again, I think this is important for strategic planning of the future, is right now, for those that may or may not know, when deputies come out of the academy, they're kind of divvied up. Half go to patrol, half go into the courts. And there's a reason for that. And then they eventually move to the court. Well, let me put it this way. Because of the contract, the courts really desire law enforcement deputies that have been trained in patrol. So we try to get that out there, get them trained, which is an important piece. But what we're looking to do is really, for the surge type approach, is really start moving more of those deputies graduating out of the academy to the courts for a longer period of time. So they know they're going to have more bodies in the courts, so they can strategically plan how that's going to impact the courts that are open. So that conversation has already started internally. We're looking to give the courts a report on that plan by the next couple of months so you can have an idea of, all right, this is what the future is going to look like for the staffing.
Thank you. James, you wanted me to come back to you?
Yeah. First of all, Judge Emity, thank you very much for what you said. And I think that I want to start with one of the points you asked me about the number of cases that resolve without a trial. So it's absolutely the case that for the 80 cases that are being set every week, time not waived for domestic violence misdemeanors, that the great majority of those cases are resolving. But that's, in my view, a symptom of the problem, is that there's no way 2 judges can handle 80 cases, but why are they being set time not waived for jury trial is because there's not capacity in the system to have a resolution of the case before that date. And when you have 80 time not waived misdemeanor domestic violence cases, that's 80 victims who've been subpoenaed for trial. That's officers who've had to come to get a court notice for the trial. We've had to prepare the trials because we don't know both sides don't know which of these 80 cases are going to go. And so we have to try to be ready on all 80, even though we know that some 5% of them are going to go, but which 5%? To Judge Emity's point that the courts are fully staffed with the number of judges that they have, they're fully staffed for the reduced capacity that we have in 2023. And even that, I'll say, question mark, because as Judge Emity and I both noted, several of the judges assigned to criminal do not have court staffs. So they're fully staffed, but for that reduced capacity. And then I guess the last point I'll make is really a question for all of you, which is, it is the case that the courts in our county have found creative ways for the county to fund the courts. And what I mean by that is that right now, the Department of Pretrial Services is in receipt of a grant, and the county then contracted with pretrial services and the courts to give the courts money from that grant. And one of the criminal courts that's operating right now is funded through that grant from pretrial services. So I'm not on the budget office, I'm not in county council, I'm not exactly sure how that worked, but I do know that creative minds found a way to get more funding for our courtroom so that we could have an additional courtroom.
Damon from the Public Defenders.
Although, Judge Emity, did you want to respond specifically to that point?
That's okay. I'll come back to it. Thank you.
I'd be happy to hand it off and then make a couple comments afterwards.
Is that all right with you?
Please.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. I am not, I apologize that Judge McGowan's not available to be here today. I am not well-versed in the issue with the pretrial services grant, so I can't speak to that issue. I did want to talk about, I did want to say as a general statement, I would agree that it would be very helpful for the District Attorney's Office and the Public Defender's Office and the court to talk about focusing efforts towards resolution before trial. It's not because it's a really complicated issue that would be completely uninteresting to most of you in terms of the dynamic that happens there and whether or not the trial deputy is the person who's at the pretrial conference. And so there's a lot of information about that wouldn't be very interesting, but I'm happy to have that conversation. We also would prefer for cases to resolve sooner. So I don't believe, it's not because we don't have pretrial conference calendars, it's not because we don't have trial readiness conference calendars. So I'm happy to have that conversation, but this is probably not the best setting for that. I also just want to make sure that I say this. Contract personnel from the Sheriff's Office can only be used at our magnetometers. So I just want to be very clear about that. We can't have non-deputies in our courtrooms.
Judge, if you don't mind my interrupting, is that practice, is that statute, is just, what does it mean that, that we can't?
That's a good question.
Well, thank you.
And I wish I had the answer off the top of my head. Actually, I may have an answer for you on that question. I don't have an answer on that question. I do know that the law requires that we contract with the Sheriff's Office. So I do know that much. But beyond that, I don't have a direct answer to that question today. But again, and I would agree that there's an amazing coordination that's happening. We have For example, the criminal supervising judge spends a couple of hours of his day every day sort of working out where deputies are going to go. And that's not a complaint, that's just the nature of where we are at the moment. But the coordination is very helpful and amazing, right? I mean, so everybody's doing the best they can. We're using our resources in the best way that we can, I think. Thank you for deferring.
Thanks, Judge. First, I want to thank James for a great report and the district attorney and James for raising this issue. I know we've been having this for a number of months, and I want to thank Judge Emily for her thoughtful responses and insights, and the SO, or the sheriff, for his comments. Let me begin with the observation that we certainly would like to work towards a collaborative solution. I think that we collectively agree that there is an issue. But from the outset, I would propose that our guiding principle should be to advance justice. I think there's always a concern, in particular from our perspective, that process and efficiency metrics should be secondary and oftentimes can be misused and actually pervert our goal of advancing justice. In short, speed does not automatically equate to fair and just outcomes. And I want to highlight that particular issue. Molly O'Neill and I had an opportunity to discuss the report, and she asked, and I'd like to share about 3 observations. The first of which is, and James already referenced this, is the impact on workforce. Because as we've already said, this backlog is real and it's having real impacts. It's reverberating through the criminal legal system, and just one direct example or consequence is the crushing caseloads that James referred to. We can discuss that our felony attorneys, their life exposure cases have in essence doubled from their normal rate before COVID. It's having a secondary impact that we believe is impacting our ability to recruit and retain attorneys, and I suspect the district attorney may be having very similar impacts. We are seeing, at least at the state and national level, people are actually, and attorneys are actually fleeing this work because of the crushing impact COVID has left us. And we really do need to consider that, and this surge strategy should be one of the, or that this observation should motivate one of those potential surge strategies. Second observation is delay from the client's perspective. I think there can be a common misperception that clients prefer delay, especially out of custody clients. And I emphasize that we believe that that is a misperception, because I think it is a misunderstanding of how onerous, exhausting, and all-consuming it is to be charged with a criminal offense, even if it feels low level to us as outside observers. I would propose the most common question I've heard over my legal career from my clients is, what is going to happen to me? It is the most common question. And oftentimes we have to talk to them about what's the best strategy to achieve the best outcome, but they are laser focused on what is going to happen to me. I oftentimes will compare it to the medical, or analogize it to the medical experience of waiting for biopsy results. It is agonizing to wait to find out what's going to happen, even if you're going to get bad results, even if there is going to be what's perceived as a bad outcome for our clients. So I would emphasize that that is not at the motivation behind why you see some of the graphs that James has outlined. And I would add to that the stress is compounded by the practical reality of the situations our clients, the public defender, and IDO and ADO clients sit in, which is they are already living a very fragile existence. They are underemployed, they have unstable housing oftentimes, they have a lot of service needs, and so delay is not something our clients relish by any means. The last observation I would share is, and James also referenced this, is the duty of the defense attorney and the unique role we play in the system. I've heard it suggested at times that certain cases deserve that time not waived or speedy trial stance over other cases. And what I would point out is that our exclusive obligation is to our clients. They are the sole deciders of the speed of the case. We certainly, and we hope that they take our advice, and we will say, listen, we need more time to properly prepare this case. James points out that no case got tried that was not in a time not waived status. I would suggest it's not that all cases that started the pandemic in a time waived status remain there. It's that when we were prepared, we ultimately had to move them into a time not waived status to move them into basically a litigation posture. But my last observation in this regard is that our ethical obligation is to do right and advise our clients what is in their best interest. And unfortunately, or fortunately, the reality is we cannot, in essence, primarily serve efficiency running of the courts. And we'll remain there. But again, that does not mean that we shouldn't seek and participate in a collaborative solution. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Damon. Supervisor Chavez.
So I actually have a lot of questions, but I'm just going to focus on two right now because they're more kind of basic. One is that you raised, Judge Emity, a really interesting point about sometimes attorneys not being ready or present. And I wondered if you could talk just for a moment about whether or not that's more defense or private attorneys or the public defender. Could you talk just a little bit about who that is?
And do you mean when I said that sometimes we can't send out multiple cases because somebody's unavailable?
Right.
So a good example would be last week we had one defense attorney that had 8 time not waived cases on the jury trial calendar. Only one of those cases can go, and the other 7 get pushed out. Or they trail, so if the first one somehow resolves, the second one goes. So when I say they're unavailable, it's that if one attorney has a number of cases, and in particular in DV and certain other kinds of cases, they're not fungible. So you can't just put in a different attorney.
Got it.
So that's what I mean by that kind of unavailability.
So I mentioned that because at my request, we did an audit of the public defender's office, and that didn't really clearly come out in the audit. And what concerns me is that for a number of years, even prior to you coming, we had been trying to consider whether or not we needed to add public defenders to the, more codes to the public defender's office. And we've never gotten, here's the number we need, or here's the, anyway, I point that out because just based on that, it does feel to me that that's a substantive, real, meaningful change. And I heard, Damon, the point you raised about right now we're in a different environment than we were in terms of, the labor market's much tighter than it is today, and we have a lot more strain on all of our systems. But I think that one of the reasons that we have so many people fleeing work is that who's left to do the work is like 5 people when you need 100. And so if, in fact, what we need to do is add more codes, and I don't know the answer to this, I have a recommendation about how I'd like to approach it. I think there is some value in us taking a look at that on the county side, because that is an appropriate place for us to fund, and it does make sense for us to do that. So that's one issue. The second issue I just wanted to raise, and I don't know if this is an appropriate recommendation, but one of my significant frustrations in the work that we've been doing relative to sexual assault and domestic violence is we were taking a look at how services were being provided, how timely they were being provided, how long victims were waiting, for example, for a victim advocate or for the appropriate nurse to show up. And what I had asked at that time was that we do some process mapping so we would actually understand where the delta in the service was and how best we could remedy the system. And the one concern I have about this discussion is that, having everybody share in building out the report makes a lot of sense, because then you're getting everybody's perspective in one report. And so, I just think maybe looking at some of those tools that would allow us to take a deeper dive and maybe of some benefit. But in the interim, if there are clear areas where we know we have problems, I, for one, would like to see that discussed as part of our budgeting process. Thank you.
Thank you. Greta?
I was going to say, I think there definitely will be discussion exactly along the lines that you mentioned, Supervisor Chavez, during the budgeting process, just based on some of the information that I'm seeing come in related to budget requests that are connected to this this issue. But I was going to also speak to the kind of process mapping point that you made, and also pick up on something that Damon commented about, how, and also Judge Emity, there's a lot of complexity here around the constitutional rights of folks that are at issue, the different ethical and legal obligations of different participants in the system that take certain approaches to solving the backlog off the table. But in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be starting up a process that I think and hope most of the folks that are going to be participating are really excited about, which is going to look at process mapping and trying to identify opportunities to really get at efficiencies that don't implicate some of those really vexing problems around justice, rights to full and fair and appropriate playing of each very specific role that different actors in the criminal justice system need to play. And I think we're hopeful, based on the experience that other jurisdictions have had utilizing a similar process, that we're going to identify some opportunities either to better resource particular parts of our processes, to shift the way that we approach certain things, and then have that have a really tangible impact on how quickly certain cases can move. And also, we've talked a lot about the very significant impacts that the number of pending cases are having on the court, on the public defender's office, on the district attorney's office, and the morale impact there. Of course, we haven't really touched upon what is another huge area of impact, is that we have more folks that are sitting in custody, and that not only puts pressure and creates very difficult circumstances for those specific inmates that are in our jail for longer, but of course on our custody staff, on custody health, on pretty much every aspect of our system. And so I think all of us are really looking forward to that process beginning, and also quite hopeful that there's going to be some creative opportunities where each of the court partners, in mapping that out together and looking at information that comes out of that really in-depth discussion, can move the ball forward here. But it's vexing. I mean, this is, as folks have referenced, this is a problem, of course, that not only are we experiencing in a really significant way, but is happening in counties across California and across the U.S. And that's also creating some of the unavailability of resources that we might use locally here to solve the problem too.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn to the district attorney, and then Sylvia, I think, will be our last comment. I'm going to bring it back. And it sounds like, which to me is very fulfilling, that the direction does not need to come from the committee chair or vice chair here, that there is work happening. This was an opportunity to have everyone discuss the issue together and publicly, but it is very exciting to hear what is already happening behind the scenes and what may happen as a result of this convening. District Attorney Rosen, thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Supervisor Ellenberg. So while it's true that some courts around the country are experiencing backlogs, our court's backlog is relatively unique and extreme. It is true, as Judge Emity pointed out, and ADA Gibbons-Shapiro said, the vast majority of cases resolve without a jury trial, anywhere from 96 to 98%. That's true statewide in every court in our state. What's difficult about the problem we have is, well, how fast do those cases resolve? So in other counties, 96 to 98% of cases are resolving by way of a plea, not a trial. But if other counties can get to that result in 6 months, and our county takes a year or a year and a half to get to that result, you can see how a backlog builds. So that's just a reality of what's happening in our court currently. Now, to one of the things when Supervisor Lindberg, you were sort of laying out the different ways in which this impacts criminal defendants and their families, the way it impacts our community. The way we often see this in the DA's office is what we tell victims of crime in terms of how long it's going to take for them to get justice. And this increased delay has happened, there's been a significant increased delay in the last few years. And here's what I mean. When we were trying murder cases in the early 2000s, we would tell victims' families it will take us 2 to 3 years for this case to be tried or resolved. Of course, that was too long. That was shocking. And there were a lot of tears shed during those meetings. Now we tell victims it's going to take 5 years. And and I think what we're seeing, that all of these delays and the mountain of cases that are piling up, that's what it's translating to. And the cases that are being tried now, as James was saying, we're trying time-waived out-of-custody cases. Now, I understand the constitutional reasons, pardon me, time not waived out-of-custody cases. I understand why we're doing that constitutionally, but let's just take a step back from a system perspective. So we're trying the least serious cases, not the most serious, not the people that are in our jail that the county is paying for, and those cases aren't moving forward, and those individuals' cases being resolved, and those individuals either being released or going to state prison after conviction. So that's the reality of what we're seeing, and we need surge capacity. We need to provide more capacity to the court. And as James mentioned, there are ways in which the county can provide resources to give the courts more capacity, whether that's clerks, whether that's bailiffs, as we're talking about, or whether that's even increasing the number of commissioners. And these are things that we need to sit down and talk about. Certain of them will require state law changes, but they're doable, but we're not, we're just looking at the tools that we've always had in the box and not trying to think of how we can expand the capacity of the system. Because this is not going to resolve itself without expansion of the capacity in the system. It's just not. And I agree with what Damon Silver said. The obligation here to have an efficient administration of justice, it's not on the defense. It's not the public defender's responsibility to make sure that the system's running efficiently and justice is being meted out for defendants as well as for victims and for the community. It's the responsibility of the courts, it's the responsibility of the DA's office, and it's the responsibility of elected officials. And so I'm eager for us to sit down and talk about ways in which we can increase this capacity and provide a better and more richer justice for our community.
Thank you very much. Sylvia, I will give you the last word, and then we're going to move to our last 2 items in the remaining 10 minutes of this meeting.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll try to be brief. The bottom line is that in our county, we've had a problem with delay long before the pandemic, and now it's just exacerbated. And what I see is that the proposal is to have this silver bullet about having additional resources and additional court. In my humble opinion, that is overly simplistic, and it really does not capture the essence of our problem, which is that we have been operating in a status quo with the same mentality, practices, norms, and approaches that we had in the 90s, in the 80s, and in the 2000s, and that we're in a different ballgame. And if we throw resources, we throw staffing, but we don't change practices, we don't change norms, we don't change our approaches, we're not going to solve the problem. Statistically, mathematically, it makes no sense because our system of justice doesn't operate by just trying the cases. It operates by resolving them. And we are not creating a separate pathway for that. We haven't done it, and we don't necessarily need departments for it. We just not have sat down to do the hard work to think of an express lane, a different pathway, or to approach our work differently. We just have not. And so I appreciate very much the board's interest in making this conversation possible, because I don't think that without the court's scrutiny over this issue and your interest, my concern is that we would revert very comfortably to the practices that are familiar without any eagerness or effort to try to change it. And I think it is extremely possible in our community of collaboration and open communication to do it. It's just that we need to change our approach. And I just think it has to happen with the lens of the board so that we are all held accountable and that we're all introspective, because this is about everybody's practices and approach. It's not just the court, it's not just the defense, it's not just the prosecution, it's everyone at the same time. And we have resolved and reduced delay successfully in the past on a micro level. Now the challenge is to do it at the macro level.
Thank you, Sylvia. I'm really fascinated by what you said about kind of a parallel path or alternative pathway to resolution of cases that's not necessarily trial. I'm grateful to every single person on this dais who has made really thoughtful, useful contributions. I also very much appreciate the mutual respect that I hear from one department to another. I don't have the sense that there is a lot of finger pointing here, but a lot of calling out of issues and determinations as to how we can best break down barriers and support one another. Supervisor Chavez, do you want to offer direction here? I want to be sure that we're not duplicating the work that Greta mentioned in terms of this cross-department meeting that's already happening. Could you just say that again, Greta, what is already happening so that we don't duplicate, and if Supervisor Chavez discovers a hole, which she is very good at finding, then we'll add a little bit of direction.
Well, interested to hear what Supervisor Chavez had to say, but I am happy to say a little bit more about that. But we will be having meetings that involve the court, the district attorney's office, the public defender's office, the sheriff's office, probation, IDO, all of the partners that need to come together to really try and identify additional opportunities to create a little bit more throughput, because that's obviously desperately needed.
Do you have a time frame?
Like, I'm interested, in who's leading it, and then when does the report back come out, and where does it go?
So some of this work is happening under the auspices of the work that we're doing around consent decree compliance, and I would say it's co-led. It's we're leveraging the talents of Dr. Austin, who the court has heard from and who has done work around addressing some of these challenges around the country. So he's helping facilitate an assessment of illustrative cases that can be the basis for trying to come together on identifying some of the opportunities within the system to speed things up and to reduce the amount of time that folks are spending in custody, to address some of the challenges related to the court backlog. I'm happy to say more about who specifically from each of the participants will be present, but it's really envisioned as a collaborative process, led and supported by county administration to bring everyone together to have those conversations.
So are you the lead on this? Mm-hmm. Okay. So here's what I want to recommend is that even if that, to be frank with you, what was disconcerting to me about this discussion is that, right, like we have to, sorry. Oh,
I'm
you
learning.
and I was
can
going to say,
read
you and I both have coffee this morning. Well, there are kind of two issues that I'm concerned about. Issue one is that I think these are really important discussions, and I think committees are exactly the appropriate way to have them. But my big concern is that we have an issue this important that that we didn't have a joint presentation from everybody who was involved in it, and that to me is kind of the starting point. So I think the point you raise is really important, but there's an urgency issue, and there's kind of two sides to this. One is that I do think that there's a slight disagreement, or maybe a major disagreement for some, over what the problem is that we're trying to solve. So that's one issue. The second issue is that we have a budgeting process that's coming forward, and the administration rightly has really tried to get the board to focus on making decisions around investments really as we can, as close to the budget process as possible. And so what I would be interested in is having something come back to us in this committee, and taking the time that you've already scheduled for that, to have something come back to us as soon as April, just broadly, so that we can prepare. We know what to do in May when we have our budget workshops, if it's necessary for us to take some action. And then the second thing, so I would love a report back, but I'd like to know that everybody was involved in a discussion that at least prioritizes the top initiatives that do require some budgeting process. And then to the point that Sylvia raised, what are the policies and practices that need to be changed, at least being able to highlight what needs to be further examined. And that would be my motion through your office, because I think the county exec's office is the right lead agency. But I think the pieces, the consent decree has its own, there's a lot there, and we're going to be working on that multi-year, but there's some significant urgency that I think we need to address relative to this. So that's what I would like to
Thank
put
you.
in
I'm
the
very
form of a
glad to
motion.
second that motion, and let's take a vote. In a moment.
Oh, I was going to say, I think I agree with all that. I think that timeline is fine, and we can absolutely come back with something in the April timeframe. I think the only other observation I would make is, the effort that I just mentioned is only one of number of efforts that are underway, and I just want to emphasize how complex and how multifaceted it is. There's already wonderful efforts afoot of collaboration between the DA and the Public Defender's Office that I've become aware of on solving some of those. So I think we'll figure out what, and maybe can talk offline with you about what specifically makes sense to come back in April, because I think there's a lot that we could bring back.
I think we want to focus on capacity through the court system. That's what this is. And that's a little bit of my concern about your raising the consent decree, because I know that has a life of its own. And I do just want to acknowledge, I think everybody up here understands this is very complex. This is about human life and public safety and civil rights and lots of different moving parts to it. And and again, I'm very confident, obviously, in your capacity. I really am. But I think what we have to be able to do is recognize that we're trying to make Herculean changes in a system, and we have to be able to slice off pieces that we can just address. And this one is just too significant for us to wait on much longer.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Camille?
Vice Chairperson Chavez?
Yes.
And Chairperson Ellenberg?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. We handled item 7 on consent. Our final 2 items we're hearing together, items 8 and 9. And
I can just make a...
given the time, I would ask if you want to go right to your question, Supervisor Chavez. And for anybody who's wishing to speak on items 8 or 9, we're hearing them together. So there's one opportunity to speak, and it will come following Supervisor Chavez's comments or questions.
Thank you. I had just 2 that I wanted to raise. And one is that through the reentry programming, welcome. Thank you. You can come on up. One is that through the reentry committee, we're taking a look at the grievances relative to health care. And I just wanted to share with this committee that one of the concerns that I have is that we still don't have an appropriate mechanism from my perspective to get people medication as they're being booked out. And I would like to see us have a pharmacy of some sort, so it's 24/7, so people have their medications, so we're not seeing them again because they're not able to comply with something very basic, like having their medications when they leave, particularly for mental health. But on this one, the reason I asked this to come forward is that I was very interested in the fact that we have the high number of grievances relative to the commissary, both in terms of service provision, but also in terms of the prices. And when I read the report, it seems like, I'm not sure from reading this whether or not we're exercising our rights under our contract. So what I wanted to recommend, and I apologize you had to stay the whole time for this, is that I would actually like to have the item number 9 come to the board for an evaluation of the current contract. And the reason I wanted to ask the procurement staff for your thoughts on this is that I'm concerned that we extended a contract without negotiating aggressively with the provider over what service provision and improvements to services for people in custody that need to be, in my mind, a part of the contract, in that they're increasing prices and we're not demanding that they maintain their services. So I would just like to have the item come to the full board because I know I have other colleagues that are interested in this issue as well. And that would be my motion. And I apologize that I made you wait just to hear that.
I'm glad to second that. Do we have any public comments, public speakers?
We do have one request to speak in person, but none virtually so far.
All right, 2 minutes for our speaker, please.
Okay. And I'd like to call Paul Soto to come up, please.
Paul Soto from the Horseshoe. My first comments are going to be restricted to the time constraints on the grievance process. Say, for instance, somebody grieves a food issue. That food issue can be answered within 30 days. It is the same for a medical issue. We cannot have that. A medical issue must be responded to through the grievance process within 5 days. That's my contention with respect to that issue. Secondly, is with the commissary. The only reason why, let me give you a concrete example. Pre-Michael Tyree, a bar of soap in the county jail was $3. Now that bar of soap is 65 cents. Look at that price disparity. Another example, phone calls were $5. $5 a piece for 15 minutes with your family. Now, they give them free. So there is, and that was all pre-Michael Tyree. Post-Michael Tyree, the reason why we had the mitigation in prices in the commissary was because of what happened to him. We knew that there was an exploitation of the poor because this is one of the ways in which the poverty that is experienced in the barrios is being monetized. Because most of the people that are in the county jails, from your statistics, it was 52%. They're Chicanos, they're Mexicanos from the east side. So there's a very clear correlation between zip codes, people ending up in jail, and the exploitation of those people through their families. And so during COVID, there was literally millions of dollars being funneled through the county jails that this Aramark profited from. And now they want to raise the prices? No, absolutely not. You can't keep those prices at the same, or the county can't subsidize it, get another contractor, because they cannot be allowed to monetize the poverty.
And that concludes our speakers.
Thank you very much. Let's vote on Supervisor Chavez's motion. Looking first, if anybody has comments on that item. Seeing none, let's take a vote.
Okay. Vice Chairperson Chavez?
Yes.
And Chairperson Ellenberg?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the clerks. Thank you to all of the participants on the dais and presenters from the audience for a really robust discussion. And Javier wants to say something before we go, but we're officially adjourned.
Yes, so just off the press from our printing shop, I want to distribute our 10-year evaluation. And we were just mentioning and presented our 2 artists and the participant on the mural. And on the front cover of our 10-year report is the mural. So this is something that we presented to PSJC back in August, and then reentry in December. So we'll go ahead and pass those out to you. Thank you.